it, I felt like I didn't exist. By the time I left, I felt I didn't even exist as a person. I was a shell.
2.4 million people are victims of domestic abuse in the UK every year.
Why do I stay in prison? Where did it become okay for me to accept such treatment, and how do I get away?
Of those victims, the majority will experience some form of coercive control.
You cannot have an abusive relationship without having coercive tactics or coercion going on.
And survivors tell us it's the invisible wounds which hurt the most.
It was just constant. It was like walking on eggshells constantly.
Despite this, coercive control remains largely misunderstood.
Coercive control really defies that sort of physical, non-physical binary that we love to separate offences into.
With new laws on their way, will victims finally get the help they need?
To support survivors, we need a complete systems change.
Very, very tired of it all and unhappy. Like my life is totally wasting away and all dependent on him. Big problem is I don't know how to get away. Besides fleeing, how on earth did you end up here? 36, not a mum, in a totally cold and distant and destructive relationship. Where is the end? How am I going to rescue myself from this? Yeah. So that's 36, so that's 12 years ago, yeah.
Kate didn't leave her abuser until January last year. She showed us her diary she wrote during her 18-year relationship. Kate is a survivor of coercive control.
They control everything. You can't shower if they say you can't shower. You can't make dinner if they say you can't make dinner. So it's things that you just take for granted. You can't go shopping. They control your phone. I mean, he used to take my phone away. He would control, obviously, the financial side of things. He'd take my car keys, so I couldn't drive anywhere. He would take the house keys. This he used to do often, so that I couldn't actually leave at any point. So I was effectively trapped in the house.
So what is coercive control? Coercive control is an act or a pattern of acts of assault, threats, humiliation and intimidation that is used to harm, punish or frighten a victim. It can happen to anyone regardless of gender, race and social class, but women are disproportionately affected. Some common controlling behaviours include isolating the victim from friends and family, monitoring their time and electronic devices, and depriving them of basic needs like food and sleep. This list is non-exhaustive, but each time the victim is left isolated from a support network and reliant on their perpetrator. The complexity of coercive control means it's often misunderstood. For example, many believe it only involves psychological abuse. But is this true? Yes, many victims don't experience any physical violence, but some do. And even when there is no physical violence present, survivors say it's the threat of violence occurring at any given time that is equally as terrifying.
He controlled what I ate, he controlled when I couldn't sleep. If I was tired and went to bed, there'd always be a consequence. So one particular occasion, I just brought him a bird for his birthday, so it was like a cockatiel. Beautiful, beautiful bird. I was so tired one night, went to bed, and he killed the bird and brought it into the bedroom to show me, and he blamed me for going to bed, for him killing this bird. So there was always a consequence for everything I did that he didn't want me to.
Coercive control has been compared to being taken hostage, where the victim becomes captive in an unreal world of confusion, contradiction and fear. Indeed, many victims aren't even aware they are being abused.
Because to us, it's normal. I thought it happened in all relationships. I couldn't see my friends, so I couldn't have that conversation or start that conversation with anyone. It was only when I left that I was handed a questionnaire which had about 20 questions on about coercive control. And I remember looking at it and answering these questions, and I just got so upset because I hadn't realised that it was abuse. I just accepted it as normal behaviour.
Eventually, as victims of coercive control lose their sense of reality, their sense of self can also begin to fade. Claire gradually lost her self-confidence over the course of her relationship.
I didn't even have a name anymore. He wasn't calling me by my name, he was calling me it. Oh, it speaks. Oh, it's arrived home. It was just completely, it felt By the time I left, historically I was an extrovert type person. I couldn't talk to anybody.
A question that comes up time and time again about abusive relationships is, if it really is that bad, why don't they just leave? In reality, it really isn't that simple. We spoke to Carol Lambert, who has been working with victims of coercive control for over 28 years.
Well, why doesn't she just leave has many parts to it. But I think the cycle of abuse can help us understand to some extent why she doesn't leave.
The cycle of abuse helps illustrate common patterns of behaviour in abusive relationships. The first phase involves tensions building as communication breaks down. The second is the incident. This is where the verbal, emotional and sometimes physical abuse takes place. The third phase is where the abuser could apologise or make excuses. They could also blame the victim or deny that abuse occurred at all. The last phase is calm, where the abuse is seemingly forgotten.
And they're moving back into denying and minimizing the horrific abuse that just took place. And she feels this intermittent hope for change in the relationship. And this is the most powerful part of why women may stay for actually decades in a relationship. Eventually that period ends and she's back walking on the eggshells in phase one, the tension building.
The logistical barriers to leaving also shouldn't be overlooked. A victim's finances are often controlled by their perpetrator, as well as their daily movements and who they can see. Perpetrators are also known to track phones and monitor online activity, sometimes even using spyware. If they have no access to a car and are isolated from friends and family, victims are often left feeling like they have nowhere else to go. Events of the past year have made these barriers even harder to deal with lockdown helping abuse to thrive behind closed doors.
I remember watching the Prime Minister do his announcement and I just burst into tears because it took me back to that dark place where I was, where I couldn't go out, I wasn't allowed to go and visit friends or family.
Many say lockdown has created a perfect storm scenario for domestic abuse. The National Domestic Abuse Helpline reported a 61% increase in calls over the past year. Back in 2020, after the first national lockdown, 1 in 5 offences recorded by police were domestic abuse related. As lockdown eases this year, experts predict another wave of victims to come forward and report their abuse.
People will first try and process what's happened to them, and then there will be a rise in reports. However, it all depends on that first contact they make and if that organisation understands domestic abuse and especially coercive control and understands how to evidence that.
To get help, victims can go to charities which provide aid and advice 24/7. Frontline services are trained to recognise the signs of coercive control, and refuges provide temporary housing to victims and their children. However, survivors say these support systems are far from perfect.
I've been to 3 refugees throughout my life. They're like prison. They will monitor when you leave, when you come, everything you do, and that's not what we need. You are having the shock of your life. You've been managing the cycle of abuse for a long time. You've been appeasing the perpetrator for a long time. So what these victims need in refugees, especially support.
Even with training to recognise the signs of coercive control, victims say the lack of physical evidence of this abuse still works in the perpetrator's favour.
I could have presented at a doctor's surgery easily with bruises, pictures would have been taken, evidence would have been given to the police. It would have been much, much easier to have got my ex-husband prosecuted. Actually, he was physically pinning me up against the wall and he put a fist up to my face and he's actually saying, no, that's what you want, because if you've got marks on you, you can prove things. He absolutely knew fervently what he was doing.
Claire left her partner in 2011. At that time, coercive control wasn't recognised as a criminal offence. It's only been in the past 6 years that victims could prosecute their perpetrators for coercive control in England and Wales. More so, it wasn't made illegal in Scotland until 2019, and Northern Ireland followed suit in January this year.
These new laws that we've seen emerge have actually been sent a very powerful normative message. So the fact that survivors can now stand up and say, that is a crime, he is a criminal, I've been violated, is unbelievably helpful.
Since 2015, victims have been able to take their perpetrators to court for the coercive control that occurred during their relationships. But the law didn't take into account what could happen after those relationships end.
People that haven't been in an abusive relationship, they always kind of imagine that separation is the turning point and the point at which she escapes from the abuse. And what survivors tell us is actually it continues pretty much the same. It just manifests in different ways, but it doesn't really make that much difference.
Initially, post-separation, it was awful. 2 or 3 weeks after I left, my car was vandalised in the work car park. I had to move house after 7 months because he found out where I lived, and he started again tormenting me, so I moved.
Even if victims do manage to leave and prosecute their perpetrators, the effects of this abuse linger far past the point of separation.
Coercive control or psychological abuse compared to physical violence shows up as the stronger predictor of post-traumatic stress disorders. Coercive control creates more fear in the individual targeted than physical violence.
Samantha still deals with the effects of this fear today.
I was strangled, he slapped me, he punched me. Yes, obviously it hurt, but it hurt my pride more than anything, and that fades in time. But with the coercive control, even 10, 15 years down the line, it's still embedded in your brain.
Claire was diagnosed with PTSD after leaving her ex-husband.
I have regular nightmares, so I suffer badly with sleep deprivation. And I have this constant fear that somebody's going to tell me off, always. And then if somebody makes a sudden arm movement too close to me, I'll jump.
Kate experienced extreme physical violence at the hands of her abuser. She showed us a bag of hair she found inside her diary.
So I write the amount of hair that came out of my head after he attacked me twice. And it would have been an attack where he pulled my hair, and this is how much hair came out.
Despite regular physical abuse, Kate says it's the wounds from coercive control which still have yet to heal. What
you are left with is the PTSD. It's something that I just live with, but it's incredibly real. It's everywhere, and you're hyper-vigilant. You're always worried about what's behind you.
Trauma is common among victims of coercive control, and experts say frontline services aren't always equipped to provide adequate trauma-informed support.
The lack of education for frontline services around coercive control is a huge, huge area. If you're a specialist and you are there to support the victim and the victim goes to you, if you don't know it yourself, how can you help them? First of all, know what trauma symptoms look like. Just understand what this victim has gone through, and how they're behaving is completely normal.
Further training of frontline services is thought to be a good starting point, but many think domestic abuse education could start even earlier.
I think it's vital that young people learn about coercive control and domestic abuse. 750,000 young people every year live in a house where domestic violence takes place. So I think the sooner we start teaching people what the red flags are about relationships, but also, more importantly, starting to deal with potential perpetrators and actually saying this is unacceptable behaviour. I think that starts in schools, because schools are a relatively safe place to discuss these things. And I think with the right support, with the right kind of pastoral care around it, and with a sensitive way of discussing it, I think we can actually get to the root cause of some of this.
While education and awareness may be needed to change societal norms, survivors say there also needs to be further protection provided to them under the law. The Domestic Abuse Bill was created to strengthen measures against perpetrators and protect victims in England and Wales. Key measures include non-fatal strangulation becoming a criminal offence, the threat of sharing intimate images as revenge porn would become illegal, and the coercive control offence would be extended to cover post-separation abuse.
The Domestic Abuse Bill definitely does some really, really good stuff. Continuing the coercive control protection post-separation is absolutely vital and will make a massive, massive difference to the ability of police and prosecutors to keep some really very vulnerable women safe.
After months of debate in Parliament, these new amendments to the Domestic Abuse Bill have finally received royal assent and been passed into law. We can't yet know for certain how much this will actually impact the real lives of victims, but campaigners and survivors alike hope it could represent a major turning point in the fight against the often misunderstood issue of coercive control. If you would go back in time and speak to your former self, is there one piece of advice you'd give her looking back?
Yeah, talk sooner. if you can. And also that life will be hard and different, but it's a life free of the abuse, and that is just absolutely priceless. You just, every single day that I wake up and I don't have him or that voice, I can't explain to you the gratitude. It's just, you almost wish that you could just shake every single woman and just say it's going to be okay.